So in the Gospel Renewal section in Shaped by the Gospel, you have some exchange with Dane Ortland, where Dane expresses a concern in emphasizing the need to be gospel-centered. People have unwittingly neglected Jesus himself. And he suggests that we need to focus more attention on the doctrine of union with Christ than on the gospel itself.
Well, I'll be interested to hear Mike come at this a little more from the academic side, because I think we'd be in agreement on this. We don't have the time to talk about something of a controversy, I think, out there. There are people who would say, look, to me, and they have, and Dane does too, he says, when you make justification by faith so central, that's not really, that's fine because that motivates people to live a holy life through gratitude. But really a better and more full motivation, and Dane said this in the book, in his essay, would be union with Christ. Union with Christ is, because you're in Christ, that's your motivation for living godly life, not just because you're grateful for your justification. Now, I actually resist to some degree pushing justification aside. I do think it's pretty central to preaching the gospel. And I also resist the idea that the only motivation that justification gives me for living a Christian life is gratitude. The way Luther would put it, I think, and certainly the way St. Paul puts it in places like Colossians 1, that when I'm justified by my works or by my career or by anything but Jesus, I might be a religious person, a moral person, I might even think I'm a Christian person, I go to church, but if my justification, my salvation is something I'm achieving through career or making money or being a moral person, I'm actually under the lordship of that thing. I'm a slave.
It's an idol.
It's an idol. I'm a slave. It's a master. And when I become a Christian, I'm justified by faith. I'm actually transferred into another realm. I'm not under I'm not a slave to the world, the flesh, or the devil anymore. And therefore, when I talk to people, I say, look, you're justified by faith. You don't have to be as anxious as you are. Or if you've lost a lot of money this year on Wall Street, it doesn't have to destroy you. I mean, that's not your identity anymore. That's not your justification anymore. Now, that's powerful. I've seen people's lives completely turn around, and that is not just gratitude. In a certain sense, I don't think you can, in a way, pit union with Christ and justification against each other. To be in Christ means, among other things, I am legally now righteous in Christ. That's part of what it means to be union with Christ. And when I tell people that, it's the power of that, that you're no longer a slave, is more than just gratitude. So I felt that Dane was thinking of certain kinds of people that do preach, to be a Christian, you just have to keep telling yourself you're forgiven. And I have heard of people like that, but that's not the way you use justification to motivate sanctification at all. Mm-hmm. Mike?
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first of all, the thing that I'm sure you'd agree with is we preach justification not in order to serve sanctification. We preach justification because it's true, because it's the great announcement to people are failures even in their sanctification. Yeah. Then we treat sanctification on its own terms as another gift that we have in union with Christ. I couldn't agree with Tim more. Union with Christ by faith alone. There is absolutely no reason why we should be pitting those against each other. It's like Charles Spurgeon said about divine sovereignty and human responsibility. Why try to reconcile friends? Coherent in the fact that we are chosen in Christ, redeemed by Christ, justified in Christ, being sanctified in Christ. One day we'll be glorified in Christ. I think we need to talk more about too. What are we waiting for? And that's in Christ also. As Tim says, that changes your identity. But I'll tell you, if you're just talking about union with Christ and justification doctrine among many, union with Christ itself will lose its relevance. And so I think it's really important within union with Christ as the matrix. I agree with that wholeheartedly. floating by itself, but justification in Christ along with the other gifts. Within that matrix of union with Christ, justification is still, I agree with Calvin, the hinge on which all true religion turns.
Although some would argue that that the centre of Calvin's theology is union with Christ. I guess that's arguable, but
Talking to the right guy.
The question I perhaps want to ask that, and in this, we're sounding at this stage like we're focusing mainly on a Pauline interpretation of Jesus. So it's weighted very much from Paul's writings, and he's the major interpreter. But to what degree are we leaving this particular person, or the very distinct person called Jesus, the very life that he lived, that he modeled, the authority of his own teachings? To what degree do they inform this conversation? In other words, are we guilty of actually harvesting the work of Christ, but actually leaving his person behind in this regard?
And I think that is a danger.
Because you mentioned that you think that we should incorporate the incarnation into the gospel, which is something that's sorely lacking in evangelical circles.
Yeah.
So can you maybe
absolutely.
say something about that?
Well, and John 15, the vine, you are the branches. It's the same
that's
language.
Abiding.
Yeah,
language,
even organic
yes.
language that Paul incorporates in talking about union with Christ. I don't see there being, quite different theologies of union with Christ in Paul than in the Gospels, but justification you find there too, pretty centrally in the Gospels. Jesus of the tax collector and the Pharisee. That tax collector who cried out, "Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner," went home justified rather than the other. And yet it's all in Christ. I really don't get the debate, to be honest.
By the way, we don't have time.
Controversy.
We don't have really time to go into it, but for the record, I agree with Michael that I don't see such big differences between the Gospels and Paul on justification and union with Christ as a lot of other people do. But I'm certainly open to hearing more about it.